Hello boys and girls, friends old and new from near and far, welcome back to the channel. I'm Stian, and today we have something really cool on the bench, a 1970s jumping hour watch. So jumping hour watches have been around forever basically, but there was a big spike in popularity in the 1970s. The 1970s, the good old days. When we thought that everyone would have their own flying automobile and wearing silver jumpsuits and everything was space age. So this watch is quite typical of the 1970s in that sense. A big chunky case that has seen better days. And we see that crystal also has some deep scratches in it. At first, let's see how the watch runs. So it doesn't look too bad. Does need a service for sure, but straight lines and good beat error. So yeah, let's get to it. It's a little bit stiff to wind. Now this is a movement that probably not too many people have seen before. It's made by a company called Tenor Dorly. So you can see the TD on the rotor. They don't exist anymore as far as I know. They were one of the victims of the Quartz War, going bankrupt in 1974. But you will find their movements in quite a few jumping hours watches from that era. And they're very cool movements, as I hope we will see. And this TD movement sits inside a Rodania watch. And Rodania actually does exist still. They were a small Swiss company that somehow managed to become market leader in Belgium. So in the aftermath of the Quartz War, they sort of solidified there. I believe they're currently headquartered in the Netherlands. But this one from their heyday, if you will. And the dial is very nice, beautiful colors. Now before we start disassembling things, let's make sure we understand how things work. So we see that when we turn the crown to set the time, the minutes seems to be directly connected to, well, not really a cannon pinion, but the center wheel there, if you will. And there's a little pin on that center wheel that then causes the hour disc to jump. So we see on the underside of these discs, you have a star wheel. Quick, how many teeth on that minute disc? And with those discs off, we can turn the movement around and focus on the wheel train. And we're going to take out the balance. And you'll see that the spring just jumps up. It was unexpectedly firm, that spring. What you will normally see is that the higher the beat rate of a watch, the firmer the spring, because it needs to react quicker. So these older watches with lower beat rates typically have quite soft hairsprings, but not this one. And we see that the watch has this very cool bridge. It's like a triangular bridge. And there just seems to be a lot of dirt in the watch. So not really any big issues, apart from really needing a deep clean. And we're here to oblige. So with the power and the balance off, we can turn the watch over again and continue with the calendar side. So you might have noticed initially that the date flicks over very fast. And that's because of this lever here that pops right there. Strong spring that's holding that one in place, that one there. You might also have noticed that the date didn't flick at midnight. So that's something we're going to try to change. On the underside of this wheel we have this little finger that presses against that long lever. So with a strong spring holding it back, you get this very fast flick over. And this central driving wheel is actually a cluster of 4 wheels and pinions. The actual cannon pinion is here, and it's friction fit onto the second wheel on the other side. We're going to just take apart the rest of the keyless works, and then we can move over to the train side again. I'm kind of fascinated by this central bridge here. This looks very cool. If I was to design something myself, I'd probably make something like that, but we're almost ready for the cleaning machine. Gonna take the shock settings out and open the barrel, have a look at the mainspring.
Papa, it's time to put the paper in the garbage.
Now, for those of the uninitiated viewers, my 8-year-old son wouldn't come in and say that by his own accord. So that was a direct order from my wife, which is why I had to drop everything. Well, I didn't drop everything, but I put everything carefully down. And then I went to put the paper into the garbage. The mainspring looks very good actually. There's no problem with it. It has this curious straight kind of end, which I've never seen before. But it's clearly manufactured that way, because you would not be able to make it that straight by accident or anything like that. We're gonna peg the jewel holes. I'm gonna take off the worst dirt with the pegwood. And note on this movement that the reverser wheels are in 2 pieces. Be disassembled like that. And we're ready for the cleaning machine. Let's press play on tape. Alright, back from the cleaning machine. We're going to first start assembling the barrel. And given that this is an automatic watch, we're going to put some braking grease on the walls of the barrel. And then we put some normal grease at the bottom. And yes, I have been a little bit sloppy with the manicure lately. In my new house I have a big swimming pool, and the chlorine there isn't too kind on my fingers, I think. Anyway, we're gonna oil the shock settings. And when you do this for a while, you're gonna definitely break some oilers. They bend very easily at the tip, and they're very useful. If you shape them to different shapes, you can do a lot of different things. And that sounded extremely vague, but it's true. One of the shapes I have here is pretty sharp, so that I can use it to get in where it's difficult to reach with, for instance, the tweezer. And the shock springs, when there is no jewel underneath, they can be quite difficult to open, so that's one good example. They also serve well as toothpicks. And if you've been a watchmaker for, let's say, 50-60 years, you probably have enough broken oilers that you can use them for cocktail parties. Brilliant for shrimps. Let's start reassembling the wheel train. We put a little tiny bit of oil where they rub against the main plate. And then this overcool bridge again. You may note that it has a little bit extra opening for the keyless works parts. And that is because if you need to adjust anything there, for instance that the setting lever has come out of position a little bit, then you can open up there and adjust it. So you don't have to take off all the stuff on the calendar side. Before we screw down, we always check that the wheels run freely. And also note that underneath the rotor post there is a jewel that needs to be oiled. And it's nice to see that the train is much freer now. This little wheel here is held in place by a spring, and the spring is held in place by this little plug. For the keyless works, no real surprises there, very straightforward. The only little issue that I noticed when disassembling the watch was that the yoke spring was a little bit weak. And that makes the action of the crown a little bit less crisp. So we're gonna adjust that spring a little bit. Basically just bend it outwards ever so slightly. And that should help. And we're gonna use some grease where the metal parts press against each other. And that's a more positive action. Alright, let's reassemble the automatic module. It's a pretty straightforward reverser wheel setup. So one reverser wheel is directly meshing with the rotor in this case. And the reverser wheel is then directly meshing with the other reverser wheel. And then you have those two pinions on the reverser wheels, which then mesh with an intermediate wheel, which again meshes with the driving wheel that meshes with the crown wheel. And the tailbone is connected to the spine. Spine is connected to the hip. So we put the crown wheel and the ratchet wheel back in place as well. We don't need to put the automatic module in before testing that the movement runs as it should. But this one is a little bit tricky to get in, so I wanted to test it at the same time. So we're oiling the jewels in the automatic module. But the way the reverser wheels are constructed, the pinions in the reverser wheels have this little spring that goes between those cutouts, the holes in the reverser wheels. So we have to put a little drop of oil on those as well. That makes the winding much smoother. Alright, watch is running. Let's see how well it's running. Gonna first demagnetize it. And it turns out the only thing the watch needed was actually a service. Just getting the old dirt out. It was causing too much friction. Runs very nicely. So let's get started on the calendar works. If you remember, this central wheel has 4 different layers. The top wheel goes on top of this cover plate and the rest go underneath. It's a little bit tricky to get in place, but we'll manage. Make sure things work at every step. The date jumper is also a little bit unusual. And when you see these cutouts in a plate like this, they're really meant to facilitate operating or assembling things from the top. Checking that the date works. Now for the hour jumper, it's this little spring that's quite easy to ping. I'm going to put a little bit oil on that jumper as well. Use D5 for those things. And now the moment of truth. Can we make the date flip at midnight? First we're finding 0 on the minute wheel. That wasn't quite it, so let's try again. Looks better. That looks pretty good. And then we can simply put the hour wheel on at 12. And then watch the magic happen. One thing to mention with the date change is that when you do it manually with the crown, it's always going to flip a little bit earlier than if the mechanism does it by itself. With this beautiful dial back on, I'm going to check again. Looks pretty good. The case is brass and just plated, nickel plated I guess. It has a few scratches, but honestly I don't really think it's too bad. So we're not gonna polish it. We're gonna get some soil for our apple tree garden though. Should be enough for roughly 2 apple trees. 2 medium-sized ones at least. And we see that the crystal has some really deep scratches. Might be that someone tried polishing them because they're not sharp, but they are very deep. So to get rid of deep scratches like this, we have to use sandpaper, or at least something to really rub, let's say, the crystal off until it's all flat and even. And when we're there, then we can use something like Polywatch. But Polywatch by itself would never be good to fix this kind of crystal. If the crystal had been a normal shape, we'd just get a new one. But this one is a bit odd shaped. We're going to put the crystal together with the case and the case back into the ultrasonic. Get all the dirt off. And that's a lovely sound. I actually recorded this, so I put this on my phone so I can have a little bit meditation before I go to sleep. So the case has 2 gaskets, one for the crystal and then one for the case back. We'll put some silicone on the gaskets so they stay a little bit more supple. You can see on the underside of the case there that it's a little bit worn. You can see the base metal coming through. But it still looks pretty good. It's not so bad that you want to rub it all off and replate it. We're going to do that with another watch in not long. All right, almost ready. Just checking again that everything works as it should before we're going to put it on our wrist. And there we have it. A beautiful and very cool 70s jumping hour watch. Let's see how close to midnight we can get the date and hour disc to jump. Oh yes, baby. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, then clicking like and subscribe will really help the channel. We'll be back shortly. Until then, ta-ta.